You're watching CNBC.
What a harrowing night it was last night when I heard that we were going to finally get a verdict. Having been burned, so many millions of us felt that the injustice of the first verdict, I didn't allow myself to assume what I hoped would happen, and then it seemed like a long time, but it did finally happen, and I am very grateful to that jury for finally delivering justice for the millions and millions and millions of this country's good people who felt that we hadn't gotten it the first time. I'm grateful for the families of the victims. And I also feel an empathy for all the people that disagree with the verdict. All the sincere people out there, the African-American people and others, who still feel that OJ Simpson is not guilty. You're probably out there feeling all the injustice that we all felt with the first verdict, and I feel for you because I know that overwhelmingly this is a sincere, deeply held feeling born out of experience that none of us Caucasians have experienced. So I feel for you. I hope you don't suffer it too much, and I'm sorry because I know that you feel that OJ Simpson is not guilty. We are still dealing with the black and white reactions to so many things in this country. I never felt that this case was about race. I thought it certainly was about fame and celebrity, but what it did do was bring race to the fore, on the front burner, and we've talked about race a lot on this show, and we'll continue to do that. And that's one of the benefits that we get from this horrible, horrible tragedy. But what a long way we have to go. The other night on a television show, I actually saw a black woman journalist say, as they were going to the break, they were talking about, how they didn't let the Mark Furman stuff come in the second case. And this woman said, a lot of people in the black community feel that Mark Furman did it. Not planted evidence, did it, committed the murders. So if there are people in the black community that think that Mark Furman committed the murders, that they'll give you some just little inkling of what a distance we have to go in this country to get us all reasonably on the same page. Probably never. But we always have to work at that, work at it, and examine your own feelings toward people of another race and try to bring out the best in yourself when you look at somebody, a black person or a white person. Try to call them, because we can't go on this way. We must reach into ourselves and try to judge people by the quality of their character, not the color of their skin. I think the thing that upsets me most about our judicial system is that it allows these accusations that are thrown around toward people. Van Adderen and Lang come to mind. Liars, perjurers, planted evidence, all of these things without any evidence whatsoever, not even any evidence that Furman did anything inappropriate other than lie about using the N-word. Bad enough, but it had nothing to do with the guilt or innocence of OJ Simpson. I'd like to see the system address that you can't get up there and say Heidi Fleiss and ran with this and abortion and all the terrible, horrible things about this one did that and this one did that without any evidence. I'd like to see the system not allow that. Not in an opening argument, not in a closing argument, never, unless you have some evidence that you just trash the victims, trash the police. Let's go after anybody, the police, anybody, if we have evidence, but let's not allow that to continue. We want to look at our justice system. I also have a problem with the search and seizure laws, that there was such a outcry that these officers ultimately went over the wall after trying to contact OJ Simpson on the phone after however much time making various phone calls, that they went over the wall to knock on the door of the man whose small children were at police headquarters because their mother, his ex-wife, had been murdered. That would be in such dispute that you can't, of course you can't illegally enter, you can't illegally search, you can't do that, but to knock on the, you can't even knock on the door. So we have to look at our, recently we had Judge Harold Rothwax, a Supreme Court Justice in New York, on, and he's written this wonderful book, Guilty. We really want to look at our system, and we learned that I do believe that the law has swung too much in the opposite. We want to protect innocent people. We don't want to torture people. We don't want to threaten families. We don't want to have random searches. We don't want any of that. But I think we've gone too far where you can just... A story comes to mind about a man who twice skipped the pre-trial hearing and then ran away, and then they finally caught him and they convicted him, and then the conviction was overturned because he didn't get a speedy enough trial. He ran away. He didn't get a speedy enough trial. Or the young girl, a rape victim, 14-year-old. The police broke down a padlocked gate where she was held by the rapist who was not there. And once in the apartment, she points out a closet where guns are concealed. The man's arrested, convicted, overturned because they didn't have a search warrant. They didn't have a right to open the door of the closet. I mean, this kind of nonsense. We have to really look at our system. We have a wonderful panel tonight to talk about all this. Dominic Dunn is here, Melanie Lomax, Gloria Allred, Harvey Levin. Later we'll be joined by Ron Shipp, the former LAPD police officer and former friend of OJ Simpson and beloved friend of Nicole. But let's go to a short clip of Fred Goldman from last night. If you would, Pookie.
Ron would have been proud.
Ron is proud.
Ron is proud.
We did this for Ron.
Let me introduce my guests. Joining me here in Fort Lee is Dominic Dunn, special correspondent for Vanity Fair magazine. From Burbank is Melanie Lomax, a trial attorney who specializes in civil rights cases. With her is Gloria Allred, an attorney and former spokesperson and friend for the family of Nicole Brown Simpson. At the courthouse is Harvey Levin, legal correspondent for KCBS TV. Later, we'll be joined by a longtime friend of O.J. Simpson and Nicole, Ron Shipp. Dominic, what are you feeling?
Well, let me tell you, last night, I just will never forget it. I mean, O.J. Simpson upstaged the President of the United States.
That's right.
And do you know that if the verdict had come in while the president was speaking instead of 2 minutes later, I mean, I think half the country would have turned off the president. It's just astonishing. I mean, this whole thing is for the history books. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's absolutely astonishing.
When you heard the verdict was in, what was your feeling right there?
Well, I knew what it was going to be.
You did. You were confident.
Yes, I was. I mean, you know, Dan Petrocelli did a job that was so astonishingly brilliant to me, mm-hmm. and his closing argument and his rebuttal, just everything. I mean, it was so logical. Mm-hmm. For the first time, it was totally logical story, and yeah, it had to be that way.
Did you?
I didn't think it would be unanimous. Though. That was the great surprise of the evening to me, and the joy of the evening.
Did you think that in the criminal trial that there was going to be a verdict of not guilty?
No, I always thought it was going to be a hung jury, always. And then when they got the verdict so fast, I thought he was going to be guilty.
And that was unanimous as well.
Yeah.
So having experienced that, yeah. I wasn't ready to assume anything. Gloria, what did you think when you heard the verdict was in? Were you confident as Dominic was?
Well, I was down there in the listening room, and I was hoping and praying that it would be this, but I can't say that I was confident, but I was hopeful. And I think, Charles, that this is so much more significant as a verdict than the verdict in the criminal case, because every one of these jurors was aware that Mr. Simpson had been acquitted in the criminal case, but still, they found him liable in the civil case. I think they were sending him a message that you can't totally get away with it, and that you can't run and you can't hide from this verdict.
Now, this is characterized, Gloria, as an all-white jury, but it's not an all-white jury, is it? I think it's 9 whites on this jury and 3 people. There's an Asian person. There's a mixed, I think, what is it? A Jamaican and what is the
One
makeup?
person is mixed Asian and African American, but I might add that the sole African American juror that was recently excluded was excluded because Mr. Simpson, through his defense counsel, Mr. Baker, made the motion to exclude that lone African American juror from the jury. Nonetheless, I feel that he did get a verdict from his own community because he lives in Brentwood. It was tried in the proper place, the Santa Monica courthouse, and those jurors were from his community where he lives.
Okay, let's go to a break, and I'll come back and we'll hear from Melanie Lomax and Harvey Levin and later Ron Shipp, and I'll be right back with my guests.
Everything he deserved.
It's just that it's finally been served.
Quite frankly, I was losing my faith in the system after reading the newspaper every day. I'm glad it went the way it did.
This man was tried twice for a trial for murder. He didn't commit. It can only happen to a black person in America.
Harvey, what's going on where you are?
Well, today the lawyers are going to be squabbling over the second phase of the case, the punitive damages phase, where the jury will decide how much to punish O.J. Simpson for what they have now found to be willful and malicious misconduct. And the lawyers are going to be arguing whether they can project O.J. Simpson's earnings into the future or whether they have to kind of take a snapshot now and base the punitive damage award on his wealth at this moment. I mean, it's kind of interesting because one of the people that the plaintiffs are going to call in this punitive damage phase, which will begin tomorrow, is a marketing expert who will talk about the value of O.J. Simpson's name and likeness. And Chuck, one of the ironies here is that there are some who believe that O.J. Simpson's value in terms of his name and likeness has actually gone up, that it's more valuable to be infamous than famous. And that may well be the case with O.J. Simpson, and that's going to be a big issue of contention when the lawyers go into court.
You know, that reminds me of something that Dominic once told me in a show here, how that when Klaus von Bülow was convicted he was out on appeal. Talk about what happened with Klaus von Bülow.
When Klaus von Bülow was convicted after the first trial, sentenced to 30 years, he was out on appeal, and he was the toast of New York society. In the second trial, he was acquitted, and he was dropped like a hot potato.
Yeah, Chuck?
Charles.
Yes, Melanie.
I wanted to say that, that in legal terms, this verdict was, in fact, a stunning victory for the plaintiffs. I think that this jury really did show all indications of having dealt with the evidence and not permitted themselves to be redirected in that inquiry through these political arguments that were made about the LAPD and other conspiracy theories. I also think that at the heart of their decision was a total big-time rejection of O.J. Simpson's testimony. I think that it's clear now that you don't just have to be handsome and charismatic, you have to tell the truth. And what is the pivotal factor in my judgment in this verdict is that this jury believed that O.J. was not telling the truth and, in fact, got caught in so many lies it was hard to count them.
And I think
Chuck,
that's
let me tell you
point.
something stunning about this verdict and about the jury in this case. Watching them in court every day, this was an incredibly stone-faced jury. There were times when Daniel Petruccelli ended his argument with that moving poem where reporters would cry in court, but the jurors didn't. And they were very, very hard to read, and they seemed emotionless. Yesterday, I was in court, and to me, the most stunning thing was not watching O.J. Simpson, who was impassive, because in many ways that was predictable, nor was it watching the Goldmans or the Browns. They were extremely emotional and tearful. That was predictable. What I found stunning yesterday and revealing was watching the jurors, these emotionless people up to this point, because when they were polled, Chuck, when they were polled and asked, is this your verdict? And one by one, these people looked unapologetically at O.J. Simpson. Many of them locked eyes with him, and in a very clear, resolute tone, you heard them say yes. There was a cement worker, an unemployed cement mixer, I believe he is, who sits in the back row, who many of us believed was a defense juror. And this man almost shouted at O.J. Simpson, yes. And you could see they were talking to him. They were finally able to emote. And we had never seen them do that before. And in that one word, in the word yes, you saw the contrast in the criminal trial. I mean, Marcia Clark apologized for prosecuting O.J. Simpson. And here you have these jurors who are on the hot seat, literally, looking at this man and basically saying, we think you're the killer.
And that was a mistake, I think, for Marcia Clark to apologize. Because if, in fact, she's apologizing for prosecuting him, then it shows, I think, a lack of confidence in her case. And if she's apologetic about it, what must the jurors in the criminal case have felt about whether they should, in fact, go ahead and convict Mr. Simpson? But I agree with Melanie that there's a very important difference here with the criminal case, and that is that Mr. Simpson, of course, enjoyed an advantage in the criminal case. He didn't have to testify. He couldn't be compelled to testify, and he chose not to.
You think if he had,
no
Gloria,
advantage here.
excuse me, Gloria, you think if he had testified in the criminal case, the verdict would have been different?
I think it very well could have made a difference. I think it made a difference in the civil case, and I think we'll find that out from the jurors when they're interviewed afterwards, because in this case, Mr. Simpson was subjected to the ultimate lie detector test. That is, testifying under oath, under vigorous cross-examination. And when put to this test in the civil case, he failed, and he failed miserably.
And the essential point about Mr. Simpson's testimony is that, it was just so obviously untruthful. He never made any kind of even remotely a remote acknowledgement about his responsibility. What I find in the civil verdict is the jury had to have believed the timelines and that Mr. Simpson had a motive. That was a big issue in this trial, and I think that they bought into and actually made the determination that O.J. was not over or through or by Nicole as he had contended.
Melanie, one of you probably couldn't see it, but when they ran some opinions from the street, one African-American man said he was, convicted of a murder that he didn't commit. And of course, that feeling is shared by millions of African-Americans, I think predominantly African-Americans. Do you have any insight into that? Is it really about the oppression of black people? What is that?
Well, first of all, I think that it's really important not to overstate or categorize or talk about black people in an African-American reaction in a single-dimensional way. I mean, not only I, but everyone that I know never felt that in the first place. I think that there is a diversity of view. I think that we are in the minorities. And I think that excuse me, I think what is being responded to here is not O.J. Simpson, the man or the killer. It is the political issues that have created such fierce loyalty against the police.
So it's really about the police. It's not about so much about O.J. Simpson. They want to see this African-American hero go through. But many, and I think overwhelmingly, percentage-wise anyway, African-Americans honestly believe, and as I said in the opening remarks, my heart goes out to them because I know how we all have felt all this time, feeling injustice. Now, all these millions of African-Americans are walking around feeling, here's another injustice. And it's so sad because you try to understand it, Dominic. I mean, it's hard to imagine, having seen and heard everything we've heard, how you would get your mind around and say the man is not guilty. That means somebody else probably did. It's hard. You're a writer. You're somebody who identifies with various characters. It's difficult to understand, isn't it?
Well, it's very hard to understand. It's extremely hard.
I mean, I'd like to because I think the beginning of the racial healing is to understand. Harvey, do you have any insight? What's the feeling in Los Angeles? Is there a tension? Is there a resentment? Do you pick up anything?
Yeah, I mean, Dominic and I, we've talked about this for hours, and I don't think your view has changed, Dominic. I mean, I really think that it's about as tense as I can remember in this city. There's a mean-spiritedness in this city, and people jump to conclusions about others based on superficial things more than I can ever remember. I mean, I've heard anti-Semitic things screamed out here. I've heard terrible racist things screamed out. not just at the courthouse, but at other places as well. Dominic, you've been in the city for a long time. Is that an accurate?
Absolutely. And, you know, I was almost certain that some kind of incident was going to be provoked outside that courthouse in this last week there. I found it very ugly, very scary.
But if I may say, I've just hosted for 3 hours on KBC Talk Radio in Los Angeles this morning, and we took calls about the verdict, and we had African-American callers, we had callers of all races, and I found that people really want to get on with their lives. I don't feel the same tension, frankly, now that this first phase of the trial is over, that I did in other situations, for example, after Rodney King had been beaten. I think that people recognize that this is really about violence. And this jury found not only that Mr. Simpson was capable of violence, thereby rejecting his testimony, but that he was capable of the ultimate and most unconscionable act of violence. And I think that that's what is important to remember about this case.
But I don't think at all that people recognize this. This chasm of ours has in fact deepened. This country is divided along racial lines. And, you know, I'll tell you a story about my mother. My mother's a retired journalist. She's 81 years old.
Excuse me, Melanie, I want to hear that, but they're going to cut me off here. So let me go to a break. We'll come back and we'll hear from Melanie. Sorry, Melanie. Be right back.
This program is brought to you by Classic.
Melanie, we have about a minute, please. Go ahead.
I was saying that my mother is a retired journalist. She's 81 years old. And one of the things she tells me constantly is that if you live long enough, you know, you see everything that you fought for during your generation reversed. And what she means by that is why there is so much racial resentment and hostility in this country is because every time you have to fight the battle over with. And, you know, just her example is the consensus on affirmative action, the consensus on equal opportunity in education, and then all the attacks to reverse that. If you live long enough, she says, you see the same things reoccurring and the battles that were fought undone. That's why, you know, a lot of African Americans and other people of color in this country are so crazy because they continue to have to fight the same battle.
But Charles, may I just say, I want to thank you so much on behalf of so many millions of people for what you have done during the pendency of this case on your show, because I think you have tried to get the truth out. You have tried to have people understand what the real issues are in this case. That is one of the issues. There is also other issues of violence. And I thank you so much for what you've done throughout your shows, and I know that people support you on that.
Thank you very much. We'll go to a break. I'll be right back and talk about
Our family is grateful for a verdict of responsibility, which is all we ever wanted. And we have it. Thank God.
Gloria, OJ Simpson goes home, and his two children are there. He stops and he picks up some ice cream for Sydney on the way home. And today the children go to school, and somebody's going to turn to Sydney, if she doesn't know already, and say, the jury said you're, I mean, my son is Sydney's age, and he's perfectly capable of understanding this and a lot more than that. The children are now living in a house with the man who has been judged as killing their mother. How do you do that? What happens now with the custody?
Well, that's a very good question. We know that, of course, when there was the custody trial in December, that Judge Nancy Wiebenstock transferred custody from the guardianship of the Browns, who had guardianship of the children for 2.5 years, ever since Nicole was murdered, to Mr. Simpson. And then last Friday, the Browns went back to court seeking a stay of that ruling to stop the enforcement of it until such time as the Court of Appeals could make a decision in the case. However, unfortunately, that stay was denied. Now the question is, will this civil verdict yesterday make any difference? Can the Browns go back and reopen the custody case? I think they should be able to go back to court, citing changed circumstances, reopen the case. And the changed circumstances, of course, is the jury verdict, finding Mr. Simpson legally accountable for the death of their mother. And I think that should be a major factor, the significant factor, which deprives Mr. Simpson of custody. Why should he be rewarded for killing their mother by having custody of their children? But let me just finish one moment and just say, however, I'm not saying that that either the Browns will do that, or that if they do, that the judge will in fact change custody back, because since she wouldn't agree to await the verdict in the civil case and thought there was a different standard of proof there, she might decide that that's irrelevant to her decision on
Well,
Melanie?
I think that this judge is very hard-nosed. She is not swayed in any way, it seems to me. I'm sure that she took in account in the first instance a finding regarding whether Mr. Simpson was the killer or would be found to be the killer.
She did not. She did not. She specifically said.
Well, wait, let me just say that
no,
you can say all you want, Gloria, that she didn't take it into account. You don't think that in her mind, in making her decision at the time she made the decision, that she didn't consider whether or not she'd be wrong or not, whether or not she might be found, O.J. Simpson was determined to be the killer. I mean, that belies
can we
common
answer
sense.
it? Okay, can we answer it? The answer is that in her written opinion, she stated that she is not taking, that she did not take into evidence, admit into evidence any allegations of murder. And so that's what she decided that she was not going to do.
Harvey?
The Brown family lawyer tried several times to get the judge to hear evidence, especially the new evidence, and the judge kept putting it off. And then at the end, the judge said, well, we don't have enough time, so she did not consider it. Now, there is a second option here, which really hasn't been discussed much, but the Department of Children's Services for L.A. County has responsibility for the welfare of children in this area. And given the verdict, it is possible that the Department of Children's Services could intercede and take some action. I disagree that any action would be taken just because of the murder. I know that sounds on its face kind of ridiculous to say just because of the murder, because there is precedent that people who do things in the heat of passion but otherwise might make a good parent can keep their kids.
Well, and that's not the legal charge.
Let me finish.
You mean that I mean, I might have killed the mother of my children, but other than that, I could be a good father.
Yeah, I mean, aside from that, Mrs. Lincoln has the play. I realize how ridiculous it sounds on its face, but what the extenuating circumstance here is that you basically now have a finding by a unanimous jury that O.J. Simpson almost decapitated Nicole Brown Simpson, the mother of Sidney and Justin, and then left her on that porch for her children to find. But for the police coming in and taking those kids out the back way, had they awakened and they went down first, they would have seen the horror. And that alone might trigger something with the Department of Children's Services, but again, it depends on who's running the show.
Excuse me, Gloria, I'm going to finish my point. What I am saying is you know, I think it's really preposterous to say that this judge didn't consider this eventuality, whether she took evidence on it or not. Secondly, the measure of her responsibilities deals with the totality of the environment. I do not believe of these children, I do not believe this one issue can be as a basis. And third, people really who want, you know, O.J. to go home and pack the clothes of his children and give them back, etc. Not that I'm not sympathetic to that view, but the question is, you know, what is good for children to keep bouncing them back and forth,
Chuck,
and to have this kind of you know, being fought over like they were a chattel.
Chuck, I think what's important is, I saw your face, I saw your reaction when Harvey was talking about that, you know, a person could kill the parent of the children and still get custody of the children. And let me just say, I'm committed to changing the law in California, to getting an author for a bill in the legislature, so that we would have a conclusive presumption that if one parent kills the other parent, that they will not be rewarded for that act by getting the custody of the children, that in fact they should be conclusively presumed to be unfit for custody. And I think if we had a specific statute like that in effect in California, including if they've been found to be liable by a civil jury, then Mr. Simpson would not have custody of his children.
You know, Gloria, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I know Dominic knows this, and maybe some of you will as well. Do you remember the Broadway musical Oliver, Dominic? And there was a wonderful song in there called Where Is Love? And I'm sitting here thinking, where is common sense? Not only about the children, but about the case from the very beginning. What happened? Where's common sense? I mean, I started to turn against the jury system very passionately, and now my faith is renewed, but I'm still not sure. Where is common sense? It seems this is absurd. Even if you go back to the Menendez trial, oh, we thought they were going to kill us, so we killed them. All of this nonsense. Where is it, Gloria? What do? You just have to fight to change the law? Is that what we do?
That's really what we do. And in fact, in California just a few years ago, a lot of us fought to change the law so that the law would be changed so that domestic violence would be considered to be a factor on the issue of whether a person should get custody of their children. And that's why in this case involving this custody dispute between the Browns and Mr. Simpson, the judge did hear evidence of whether Mr. Simpson had battered Nicole, because we got that law passed. But now
Charles,
that doesn't go far enough. We have to, I think it should be that if somebody has even battered their spouse, if they have been convicted of that, they should be presumed to be unfit for custody unless they've gotten significant counseling and not reoffended in the last 10 years.
Charles, I believe that this jury verdict is an expression of common sense. In that way, I don't think you should be despairing at all, or anyone else.
Thankfully for this jury, certainly I think it is, but it seems to be rare.
And I believe, well, common sense mostly doesn't overcome passion and prejudice. I think that's true. But what I think that we're going to find out about this jury and their deliberations is that they went through the, reconstructing this crime and evaluating this evidence, which is which we've seen is a lost commodity.
And
well, we saw in the readbacks very clearly what the jury was asking to hear about. That told the whole story. I mean, this jury got this case. They got the science of this case. They were asking questions about DNA that were so relevant and on point. There were concepts that were hard for some of the reporters in the courtroom. And they were asking about specific DNA strips that were telling in this case. I mean, they got this case. They understood the science. They understood the motive issue that both sides were arguing. When you listen to the readback, the various things the jury wanted to hear again, they were all issues that went to the heart of this case.
And that's the point, that Mr. Simpson, with all his legion of lawyers and his spin doctors, was not able to hide the truth from this jury. They saw the simple truth, and that's why they rendered the verdict that they did.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're going to go to a break now. Harvey's going to leave us, and we're going to be joined by Ron Shipp, who's the former friend of OJ Simpson and Nicole, and we'll come back and we'll hear his reactions, and we'll hear about, from Gloria, I want you to think, I'm going to ask you when we come back about, you think more domestic violence victims will feel more likely to come forward now? Go to a break, be right back.
Guilty!
Joining us now is Ron Shipp, a friend of O.J. Simpson and Nicole for 26 years. After the verdict last night, he spent time with the Goldmans. Ron, what was your reaction when you heard the verdict was coming in? What did you think?
I'll tell you, it was really weird. I was driving home, and when I got home, my wife had said, hey, they reached a verdict, and I got knots in my stomach. I didn't think I would, but I did.
And what did you think there was going to be a guilty verdict or a liable verdict?
I had no idea, because during the criminal trial, after, just like what Dominic said, after the quick deliberation, and I just thought it was going to be a guilty verdict way back then, and when it came back not guilty, I was just devastated.
And how do you feel right now?
Totally relieved. I really do.
I was saying to Dominic during the break, it's as though we're all exhausted from this. I think whatever side you're on, we're just all worn out. It's a saga. I think Geraldo was saying last night it's about as long as JFK's presidency and moving up on the length of World War II. You were with the Goldmans last night. Is that right, Ron?
Yeah, I was doing an interview last night, and I went across to the hotel, and I got to spend some time with them, and I tell you, it was really a treat to see them. It was nice to see them smiling. I remember being with them when the verdict came out, during the criminal trial. And, all of us, everybody, it was nothing but tears back then to actually see them smiling.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on Nicole right now? Do your thoughts go to her?
Oh, of course. And I know she's looking down right now, just feeling as good as we are.
And Chuck, this verdict is so sweet because it's so long overdue, and maybe that's why we're all tired, because we've all been hoping and praying and working for it for so long. And I just think that it sends a message to Mr. Simpson that he is a disgrace to humanity. And I hope that this jury, when it gets into the punitive damages phase tomorrow, will strip him of every penny and literally make him pay for the wrong that he has done, not only to the murder victims, but to the families of the murder victims.
Charles, one of the things that surprised me was the speed of deliberation. I sort of had this sinking feeling about this case. beginning last week, when the same kind of atmosphere was being created in the media with all of these allegations about jury misconduct and, you know, and
somebody used the N-word.
Yeah, I mean, it began to feel exactly like there was this sort of Johnny Cochran aura surrounding the thing. It was beginning to feel to me like it came apart. And one of the things I think this jury did, when this judge said to them, "We've come so far, don't let it, you know, be lost now," in essence, that they really moved those deliberations along. The only thing that disappointed...
You said that about Johnny Cochran, because it was released into the news that just a few days ago, apparently, within the last week, Johnny Cochran apparently had a conference call with Mr. Baker and Mr. Simpson about the end of the case. So who knows? It seemed like they felt like stink bombs being thrown out there, the skunk into the jury box with all of these allegations about the jurors. And it really concerned me whether this jury was going to fall apart. I'm glad that the judge held the case together.
And if we've learned one thing...
Let me ask Dominic, you spoke with Kim.
Yeah, I spoke with Kim just before I came here, and there is this immense feeling of relief that I got from her. I mean, she's exhausted, too, just exhausted, but she was a very different Kim than I've been seeing for the last few years. Do you know what I mean? And I just wanted to hug her. She's on her way here to New York. Fred is following the next day with Patty, and they're going to be doing all the shows and so forth here in New York. And but I just found this, I mean, she wasn't cheering, yeah, it was just, thank God. Thank God.
Now, Dominic, you'll go back to Los Angeles. What's your perception? O.J. Simpson is somewhat out and around in Los Angeles prior to this. Do you think it's going to change what happens when he appears in public? I don't know what it's been like now. I think he gets cries of murderer before this verdict.
Yeah, and no, I think well, it just depends. I mean, I think there's no way he's going to return to his life the way it was before. It's just not going to happen for him.
Chuck, one thing I want to say,
yes.
And the sadness of this whole thing is what you guys were talking about earlier. And I think about Sydney and Justin, you know, what's going to happen with them. And also, I also think about Arnell and Jason, you know, what they have to be going through also. No one talks to them, no one hears anything about them.
What
and
about
the children
Sydney?
have to bear,
yes.
The children have to bear this new label that their father was a killer.
Which is awful.
I mean, that just must be devastating.
And they go to school right next to the chapel where the service was held for Nicole. Now, what's going to happen? They're going to be in school today, as I was saying before. I just can't get that out of my mind. These
well,
poor
I wonder
children.
what happened last night in that house when they came home. And you know, two of the lawyers are living in that house. Are you aware
Blazer's
of that?
In the guest house.
Blazer's in Cato Kalin's room, and Leonard is in Arnell's room. So, I mean, the whole atmosphere since those kids returned home is all about this trial. I mean, you can't say, oh, they don't know. Go upstairs, kids. Of course, she's 11 years old.
And you can't turn on television. I mean, you could watch anything. Nickelodeon and something will come on. It's all over the place. That's where I say common sense. What is this judge thinking about? Haul them someplace else? Well, yeah, you don't want to haul back and forth, but how about just someplace where there's not a convicted murderer or someone held liable for murder there? When will this go up on, when will this be reconsidered, Melanie? Do you know?
Well, reconsidered meaning the appeal process?
For the custody, I mean.
Well, I think that the Browns' attorney this morning indicated that this is a subject of active consideration. I think that if they were to move to reopen the matter, which I think is inevitable, that they would do it fairly rapidly.
And let me just tell you, that could be done within a few months.
What about the appeal, Gloria? When would that go forward?
Well, the appeal could take significantly longer. I think that they should proceed on all fronts if that's what they wish to do. They could proceed with the appeal at the same time, go back in and file to reopen the case, and again, they could get into court within a few months if they chose to take that route.
And if the appeal was granted, that means there'd be another trial? Is that what that means?
Well, if the appeal were granted, I mean, it depends. It's very difficult to get a trial court decision in a custody case.
I don't mean the custody case. I mean in the Simpson case. In
this Simpson civil case, surely, you know, it sounds as though Mr. Simpson is going to be filing an appeal. It can take a long time for an appeal to be heard, to be decided. You know, it might be a year, it might be longer, depending on how many cases are on the court's calendar.
I mean, if they overturn the verdict, that means there'd be another trial?
Depends. It depends. If they find error, if it's a harmless error, they're not going to overturn the verdict. If it's reversible error, then it may very well be that there would be yet another trial. I think it's unlikely that this is a case that's going to be reversed on appeal. They have grounds they're going to argue. That doesn't mean they're going to be successful.
No way. No way.
You don't think so, Melanie? Why?
I think well, I just think, first of all, there's enough what they call in law substantial evidence to support the verdict. And if there is substantial evidence, irrespective of these errors that are alleged to have been committed, then it will be sustained. And secondly, judges are people. I don't think, the will, political or otherwise, is not there to have another third trial.
You know, something struck me, just a little detail. It's after the fact, but it just struck me. I had a delayed reaction. That finally, when O.J. Simpson took the stand, and finally when he said, what was he doing? He was in his front yard hitting golf balls. I'm sure he said that because that's how he allegedly got to his Bronco and made a call, and he wasn't really on the road looking for Paul, or he was out looking for his dog. This is what he said. Well, all through that period of time, Alan Park is there. Alan Park is there during that period of time. So how would he even say that in the first place if he's looking for a dog? The driver is sitting there. So, I mean, the whole thing falls apart, and that's why I think it's been so offensive to so many people. It's not even a close call. There isn't a call. In fact, Van Adder and Lang says you would always find some tiny piece of exculpatory evidence where lead you to believe that is it the best they can with a few blood drops. There's all this about, look at, there's 4 blocks. Oh, you're right. Must be somebody else. Must be somebody else.
When you mentioned about common sense, at one particular time, I was feeling like I had lost mine.
Well, that's what it did. And one of the shows that I did, I talked a lot about the movie Gaslight. And I felt that that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing. I mean, they're saying, white is black, black is white, orange is green, green is orange, and as I said, there are people in the African-American community that think Mark Furman did it. Did it. Anyway, I want to thank Dominic Dunn and Melanie Lomax and Gloria Allred and Harvey Levin and Ron Shipp, and I hope we come together again and we'll address whatever there is to address, and hopefully it won't be this subject. We'll meet under, although these are better times. Thank you, everybody. I'll be right back with a final.
7-7-44-11. Sorry, no CODs.
On Monday night's show, I stated that after the O.J. Simpson glove demonstration in the courtroom, Alan Dershowitz secretly took the gloves into a holding cell and had O.J. Simpson try them on without the latex gloves underneath. Alan Dershowitz's position is that he did this with permission, and then there was nothing secretive or inappropriate about his actions. Since I can't prove there was anything secretive about Mr. Dershowitz's action, I want to apologize to him for suggesting so. My opinions were formed by a quote from Mr. Dershowitz's book, Reasonable Doubts, quote, during the recess following the glove demonstration, I went into Simpson's holding cell with him. While the other lawyers talked to reporters about what had just happened, I took the gloves in with me and asked Simpson to try them on without the latex gloves, end quote. That quote and various opinions from several attorneys that it is inappropriate for the courts to release evidence of a crucial nature to one side without informing the other side caused my feeling that something inappropriate had taken place. That is my opinion, but it's not a provable fact. So once again, I want to apologize to Alan Dershowitz. Perhaps the court should apologize to all of us. I want to thank all of you for watching. I know that the races and all of us can get along better. I think that I even could get along better with Alan Dershowitz. Good night, everybody. Good night, Mom. I love you.